Welcome to today's Ask the Experts webinar. I'm Tracy Zatinik, Marketing Manager at Amplifi. I want to thank you for joining us to discuss utilizing digital catalogs in Salsify. As you know, when registering for this webinar, you had the option to pre-submit questions, which we'll be answering today. During the presentation, you have the ability to submit questions through the Q&A feature. However, due to our limited time and the complexity of our questions, we will follow up at the end of the presentation with any questions that we didn't have the opportunity to answer.
Exactly what the issue is.
This session is being recorded. You can expect an email from us in the coming days with your link to the resources you can locate on our website at goamplify.com. Without further ado, let's get to know our experts. First up, we have Ametra. Ametra is the Salsify practice lead here at Amplifi with years of experience working in the MDM space. Ametra is responsible for diving into new technology platforms to not only understand feature functions, but also how to solve client use cases that leverage new partnerships and the internal enablement of delivery and sales for new platforms. In addition to her duties as practice lead, Ametra is a principal consultant responsible for successful deliveries across Amplifi's portfolio. Next up, we have Chris Colyar. Chris is the Chief Technology Officer at Amplifi. He has been designing and implementing PIM MDM projects for 10 years, starting out first working on the software vendor side and later transitioning to the consulting services side. While his background is rooted in software development and architecture, years of implementations across a variety of markets, industries, domains, and technologies has changed how he views success. Chris's primary focus is now working with the team at Amplifi to understand business users' goals and guiding them through incremental successes to bring those goals to fruition. At this point, I'm going to hand it over to Chris, who's going to give us a high-level overview of what we'll be covering today.
Awesome. So I'll give you a quick introduction. Ametra is really going to be the star of the show. So when we talk about our Salsify customers, the most simple and common use case is our Salsify customers utilizing the power of the channel syndication piece of the platform to connect their data's organization to their consumers' buying channels. Every customer starts with that foundation. Of those customers, we have a subset who actually take it a step further and start doing channel-specific enrichment. So they're tailoring and optimizing the performance of their data across those channels within the Salsify platform. And what we see from that is you start to see that the value of the data in Salsify goes up. So no longer are you just relying on a pipeline where the data is going through from one place to another, but now you're actually starting to invest in the data in the platform. Of those customers, a smaller subset is starting to realize the value of that data in Salsify. And so Salsify has built around that different mechanisms to start extracting the value. So what we're going to be talking about today is one of these tools, the digital catalog. So Ametra is going to talk about some of the features and talk about the power of using digital catalogs to socialize that valuable data within your organization. Go ahead, Ametra.
So as Chris mentioned, we're going to be covering catalogs today. When we take a step back at the use cases that we're seeing commonly with our customers that are utilizing catalogs within Salsify, it tends to be two specific things, right? So the first one, obviously, if we talk about channels, we know that that's focused on getting data out to external users, right? So a lot of the time, those are going to be the retailers that within Salsify, there may not be a direct connection, right? So when we think of a big retailer, or even the case where we can't use our templated exports to get that data out, but we still want to be able to share product content and assets with those external data consumers. So that's a big one. Second to that is, of course, there are some teams that obviously don't have the need within a given organization to actually be in Salsify, interacting with the tool in a heavy capacity, right? They may not have responsibilities around any specific enrichment or own any administrative task, but they're consumers of the data. These users are commonly members of sales organizations, right, within a given company that we work with. So they may say, hey, we have a specific team that focuses on this product line or a given region, right, so on and so forth, and we want to give them access to these products in an easily digestible format, right? And that's where digital catalogs comes into place. And similar to those external users, the internal users of an organization will have the ability to download that product data and assets, and also do things like generating sales sheets based on templates, so they can obviously utilize the data that we're storing in Salsify to complete their task, right, and responsibilities. So that's what we're going to be covering today. Tracy, I think we have some questions that we're going to dive into.
Yes, we do, and thank you for that introduction. All right, so question 1. How can we manage catalog expiration dates and password protection by catalog?
Yeah, so for this specific question, when it comes to actually managing a catalog, if we're talking about the life cycle, if you will, the process of sharing a catalog is pretty straightforward. So we'll get into the tool a bit more, but once I share it, the audience will be able to see that it is a public facing URL, and that an organization actually does have the ability to control who they share that URL with, right? So going through the process of determining the audience for a given catalog up front is something that we always recommend, right? So we know we're not only getting all of the requirements for the data that we need to be presenting, but we're actually sharing that URL with external consumers, right? Now, with that being said, obviously, as a user, we're driving who's consuming this catalog, who has access to that URL. So then we also have to drive the duration or the time that catalog is live, right? So another point when we cover those requirements is making sure that there's a process in place to retire catalogs. So that could be as simple, and it is as simple as making sure that we delete that catalog, thus that URL is no longer active, and those previous users that could consume that data, or the audience, if you will, can no longer access it, right? Of course, we have the ability to copy those catalogs, so it's not, hey, we have to go back through the process of creating this again. It's as simple as, hey, I'm going to copy this given catalog. I'll probably name it my, product catalog for a given product line. And maybe just say that it's inactive, so we can track if we've shared it or not, and then get rid of the live one. When it comes to password protection, I think maybe our user or member in the audience that was asking this question could be referring to internal users and not necessarily the external users, right? Because we just covered how externally access to that URL is how we control that access. So internally, if there is enhanced security in place within Salsify, that's how we would control who's working on what catalog. But of course, always stress that process needs to be defined around who owns these things and who can alter what. Great question.
All right, so question 2, how do we brand our catalogs in Salsify?
Now that's a great question. So now I'm actually going to jump into the tool and I'll share a little bit with the audience on how you can customize your catalogs, make them specific to your organization. So when external users are viewing your products, that they're getting the look and the feel that you want to come across. So as the audience can see, I'm now within Salsify, right? So where I am here, you can see I'm in our main catalog module. So as I was mentioning in the intro, and as Chris alluded to, this is all centered around your data, right? So your product content when it comes to your attribution, as well as your digital assets. So this particular module is where you're going to control that, right? You're going to have the ability to determine what products are going to appear on a given catalog, which you can see here. I've created a simple list. And define the actual products that appear on that list, and essentially set a filter for my catalog based on list membership. So that's what we have on this view here. Taking it a step further, of those actual products, what are we actually going to be showing, right? Of course, we want to have the ability to cater this to our audience and make sure that we're showing within the catalog really the high points that we want to hit, right, regarding our products. So it'll be things such as the name, any pricing information as well, collection, special features, and things of that nature. But there may be other attribution if we have a large data set that we don't necessarily want to show in the catalog, but we can control allowing users to download that. So we still want to make it available, but it may not be in the catalog. So when we're looking at our properties here, this is going to be what we see, and we'll get into a catalog here shortly. All right. But here's a URL that I referenced, right? So when we talk about providing access, this is what we'll be sharing externally. So probably sending it in a branded email. We're saying, hey, we have this catalog live. We'd like you to utilize this links to view our products and download the necessary product data. So now I'm just going to click it and it'll open up. Right. Now here's where we can get into the branding. So for the purposes of today's webinar, everything's Amplifi specific, right? So that's great. So first thing that we see here when I opened up this catalog is a splash image, right? So if I jump back and I'm going to go to my display, we can control all of this, right? So I have the ability to say, hey, I want that splash image. So when someone navigates to this URL and they open it, this is the first thing they'll see. Of course, make it as jazzy as you want, brand specific, so on and so forth. Right. Once I click off, you guys can see that there are some other Amplifi logos and branding here as well, right? So obviously the logo is up top, so you guys will have the ability to put your organization's logo there as well, and then utilize a banner. So the banner is controlled by something that is just an extra layer on top that Salsify does offer, which is great, and it's a lab that's specific to digital catalogs, right? So if I jump back, you guys will say, oh, I don't see anything around a banner on this particular screen. That's because we utilize a lab. So the lab gives you that ability to give that extra customization. So you can do things like put additional subtitles, you know, and banners and things of that nature. So that's how we do this. So when we talk about the process of actually pulling these assets, like where am I getting that banner from? Where is that logo actually coming from? So first things, obviously, is going to be to identify what assets you want to use for the branding of your catalog. And then secondly, we're going to have to get those assets into Salsify. So now I'm going to jump really quickly to a list that I've created that has my assets that I just covered on my catalog. So here you guys can see that I have my logo and I also have my banner. And the splash images is in the system as well. So essentially we have to make sure that we import those assets into Salsify. And then once we're in the configuration, be it the lab or the actual digital catalog module, that we just select those assets and then they'll be rendered. So that's pretty straightforward. And that's how you guys can actually brand your catalogs and give them the look and feel that you want. Tracy, I think we're good for the next one.
Love the branding on that catalog, by the way. It's beautiful.
All right, so question 3. What happens to our catalogs when our product data changes?
Yeah, that's a great question. So of course, as I walked through when I was in the catalog, we're actually pulling directly from our source content that's within Salsify. So what does that mean? It means you've imported your products within Salsify. And at this point, you may be making some updates to your data, you know, here and there, changing some attribution around, but anything that lives on the source side and is included in a particular catalog is going to be rendered, right? It'll be live. So there isn't a concept of any separate data maintenance for a specific catalog as far as the product data goes. One distinction that I do want to make is, of course, this is different, obviously, for some of our audience that's a little more experienced with channels and may be working in that way, right, where we're not doing some of the more advanced things in terms of mapping for our properties here, right? We're just simply selecting the properties that we want, and those are all on the source side, whereas we can make the distinction with channels, right, where I can utilize formulas, I can set static values, and those are things that will have to be maintained separately down the road, sometimes as the product offering over an organization changes, as your business grows, you know, and alters and things of that nature. But with catalogs, the takeaway is as long as we're maintaining that source product data, it'll be live on your catalogs as long as you have that URL up and you're sharing that.
Great. All right. So question 4, how many catalogs should we have in Salsify?
Okay, this is a big question, and this one is pretty common. So on some implementations where we're working with customers, and of course they have catalogs and they're excited to use them, they'll say, so how many catalogs should we have? Like, should I put all of my products in a single catalog? How should we split them up? Should we split them up by brand? Product line? Is there a particular data point that we should be covering here? And I think this one, similarly to how we want to make sure that we're setting all our requirements up front for what's in a given catalog, this is going to be kind of the first place to actually start, right? Is determining what's going to be the basis of our catalogs, right? So what do we want to get out of them? So I've worked with customers where it's been brand specific, right? So we can think of a parent company where they may offer multiple brands, and that's how they wanted to render their catalogs, right? And then from there, as external users, smaller shops or retailers that they're working with get onto those catalogs, the data is going to be brand specific, right? One thing that I do want to point out, just in terms of this actual use case, is that it may not even necessarily be the number of catalogs that's impacted as much as the data points that we're allowing the consumers to filter on and search on, right? So that's another thing to keep in mind. So even if it's not the case where we're saying, hey, we want to split these things up based on this data point, we could also serve that same purpose via a particular piece of functionality. What I will say, of course, where it's pretty much straightforward is if you're curating a catalog for a specific group or specific retailer that you work with, then obviously, if you want to isolate the data that they're seeing, then you're going to go ahead and create a catalog specific to them. But in other cases, it may be a point that you can also just go ahead and filter or do things like that. And with that being said, I'm actually going to jump back in the tool and I'll show you guys some ways that we can actually control some of those data points.
Out of curiosity, Ametra, how long did it take you to set up the demo catalog? Just from, we have a webinar coming up, I need to create this. What was that total duration?
I set my catalog up in less than an hour. And
okay.
of it was just me pulling our images and our logos and making sure that those looked good and then putting them on the catalog. But in terms of going through the actual configuration steps, like I mentioned, starting off with creating a list to make sure you know what you want to include in a catalog, and then selecting the properties and checking a few boxes on saying, hey, you can download the product feed or you can download the assets. It's pretty fast.
So you're
these out on hour-long calls with customers. Just set
awesome
call, with a customer, talk through the process with them on what they're looking to get out of it, and actually configure them on the spot.
So the time constraint really is on defining what you're trying to achieve and then figuring out each of those details that are going to then map into the tool.
Yep, for sure. So let me jump in the tool really quick, and I'll show a couple of different things that we can utilize to control how we're interacting with our catalogs here. So I'm actually going to jump back to my lab. So I mentioned filters before, and you guys can see when I get back in the catalog that there's going to be a lab panel that essentially will allow me to navigate through my products. I have a pretty small data set today, only 10 products, so I only use one data point, but of course you can build this. It could be specific to category, reference brand a lot. It could be specific to brand. It could be a different feature that customers really care about. So if we jump in our catalog today, you guys will see that we have watches, right? So this is something that's tangible, material matters, right? So I want to filter by that. You guys can see that we can also on that given filter have the count there. So of the 10 items I have, 6 of them are an aluminum material and 4 are stainless steel and so on and so forth, right? And then just clicking that is actually going to go ahead and apply that filter within your catalog. So that's one point. And then of course, coming up above, we can also within our actual lab, control the different properties that we can search on. So straight away, of course, name and the product identifier that we have set up within Salsify, there's going to be what you can search on. But if there are other particular things like brand, keep going back to brand, I think that one's pretty common, that you want to allow the data consumers or the end users of these catalogs to utilize, then we can set that up here as well. And then we would just update our catalog and even the changes. So Chris was asking questions around how long it takes to actually configure these things. And a lot of that effort, to his point, is on the requirements. Even once we're going and implementing changes, a lot of these are quick fixes, right? So if I come in and I say, hey, to set this to brand, and then I can do an update, right? And it's going to say catalog updated. It's pretty simple. And then you actually go right back within it. And it's the same thing even for the updates to the images and the properties, where there's not a lot of time there to make those updates and see them live. Right. Now, jumping back here, and of course, making that distinction, once again, want to emphasize with the audience that this is the main digital catalog view that you'll see within your instance of Salsify, whereas, of course, we have the lab capability there, which is just an additional ask to say, hey, can I get this lab enabled? And then we can go ahead and start adding more to the look and feel, altering things like those filters, subtitles, and search capabilities and whatnot. All right. So on the view, here are my properties just to walk through this. Search and navigation, this is just enabling the navigation there, so that's pretty straightforward. And then the product feed. So also, of course, the big use case is, hey, if I can look at the catalog, can I actually go about getting this data out of the system as well? And yes, so that's why we would have this enabled. So if you want to allow the consumers of the catalogs to download the product data, you can specify the format here. Right, and it'll download locally for them. And then from there, you can also specify which properties you want them to actually pull out of the system. So if you say, hey, we don't want to share everything, there may be some data that you're storing within Salsify that shouldn't be public facing for particular users. You can set that limitation as well. All right. And then jumping here to assets, a lot more here. As you guys can see, we can transform assets, rename them, things of that nature. And this is, once again, same concept as the product data feed. Where we're just downloading those assets locally. So a user of a catalog that's viewing it can actually get those assets associated to those products, and I'll just bring them out in a zip file there. And any metadata associated with those can also be pulled as well. But you could say, hey, I want you to be able to get my main image and my alternate images here, and we can specify that and pull that out of the catalog. Now, how do we go about that? So basically, as you're navigating through the catalog, you guys could see I kind of started on this kind of main view. But then if we transition, and I did an initial filter and I had a subset of products there. Once I start clicking on them, this is where we can see the actual product properties, that we have mapped in our catalog, right? So the attribution and any additional images that you want to have on the screen would be rendered here. Right? And in terms of actually selecting a product to download that data, you guys can see I just clicked on one. All right. We'll cancel that. And we'll do the export here. All right. And then from there, the users can go about downloading the catalogs, emailing them to themselves, and they'll get those assets and the product data. Tracy, did we have any additional questions?
I do not see any currently submitted. We can go ahead and go through our outro. And
I think one more thing we can mention is, so digital catalogs are available, and we see a lot of use for, like Ametra said, socializing that data internally or externally. I think another feature that you might hear reference to is enhanced content. Now, this is an additional functionality that Salsify has available, so you can talk to your customer champion about that. But what it does is it's a similar set of functionality to the digital catalog, but it's tailored for some of the syndication partners. So if you think about like the Amazons and the Walmarts, where you're allowed to do that really heavy curated HTML. So generating kind of like that catalog Ametra was showing, but you're really generating within the page space that's available to you on those consumer channels. So there's some really cool technology there that's new and is receiving constant investment. So definitely think that's something to mention if digital catalogs interested you and you want to see that concept and how it can apply further to your channels. I think that would be worth mentioning. So I did want to say that. But if there are no questions, and I'm looking at chat and I don't see any either. So I'll go ahead say thank you, Ametra. I think, for the audience, I hope you see that really the power of digital catalogs is coming from your users in Salsify, not just mapping data so it just flows through as an empty pipe, but interacting with that data and investing in the data. So you're enriching it, you're changing it, everything that you should be doing to get more value out of the Salsify platform is going to inherently raise the value of the data in the platform. And so Salsify's offerings are going to, are all tied to focusing on that journey, starting with modeling your data, which is going to translate from what your data looks like as you operate internally to your organization to the actual consumer-facing channels, which is where your end consumers are discovering your products, your brand, deciding to purchase your products or brand. It's like the baseline. The second tier on top of that is, now that you're doing that, your users, you want to be able to analyze and respond to trends against your data. What's happening in the market, what's happening in your channels, what edits can you make, how do you react to that so that your data is keeping up with the demands of the world. And as we all know, the world's kind of crazy, so you have to be pretty fast. And then on top of that, digital catalogs really shows you the philosophy and heart of Salsify to marry not just information that's available in the system, but presentation. Because, we can't just give bulleted spec sheets to everybody. I would love it. That's how I think. But you really want to stand out and stand apart. So branding, the exercise that Ametra showed, like sometimes very little things like a lab with a banner can make a huge difference in how well you build that relationship. And then beyond. So as you continue to get more users accessing Salsify more often throughout the day, we want to continue exploring, like, what are the other features we can do? What else can we do? And the goal is to, expand that footprint and have more ownership of how you're operating. So as you walk away from this webinar, my kind of call to you is consider this functionality, consider what you could achieve with it. What are your goals? Now that you know it exists, or now that you might have further questions with it, reach out to us. We're happy to field any questions, give you some special one-on-one time to discuss crazy ideas you might have, or just answer a couple curiosities that this might have raised. So, our goal is, you're putting a lot of time and effort into your data, so we want to make sure you're getting all the value out of it back out. So thank you very much for your time. Tracy, do you want to wrap us up?
Thanks, Chris, and thank you to Ametra. All right, this concludes today's webinar. But as a thank you for attending this Ask the Expert session, we are offering a complimentary one-on-one follow-up session, just like what Chris just mentioned. This is with an expert to answer any specific questions you have, aside from those that we've already covered today. This expert session allows you to have that special attention of an industry professional to help you through your most difficult pain points. If you're interested in taking advantage in this one-to-one session, please just respond to the follow-up email that will include the recording, or email us directly at experts@goamplify.com, and we'll be happy to get you started. We hope this webinar gave you the opportunity to see what our company has to offer. Let's continue the conversation on how Amplify can help your business with your MDM strategy and consulting services. You will receive a recording by email in the following days, and be sure to keep an eye out for more Ask the Expert sessions in the new year. We'll be looking forward to being your trusted resource in the MDM space. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you.